Hi guys and welcome to the VFX show, the only show on the internet. Okay, let's get right into it. First things first, this is a tutorial about how to set up your cycles render in Blender 2.8 and send it to a compositor. In this case, I'm going to be using After Effects, but this will apply for most other compositing packages as well, including New Confusion. I'm not teaching you how to do visual effects compositing in Blender because it's pretty primitive and I know After Effects a little bit better anyway. And sending it to another software would be a little bit better of use. Full disclosure, I didn't model this robot. It was modeled by 3D HD Scan. And as you can see on Sketchfab, the only thing with this 3D model is that it does not did not come with rig, so I had to rig it up myself, and it's pretty simple rig. I just cut up the different objects and added a IK system. Let's get right into it. So the first thing you want to do, obviously, is go into your render tab and select your render engine as cycles, because it's honestly going to be starting on Eevee, because Eevee is the new big thing. But for visual effects compositing and adding visual effects to a live action shot, Eevee is not good at all. As of right now, it has no features that can really enable that without extensive amount of work. Another thing you need to do is in the render tab, just go down to film and select transparency, and that's going to give you a transparent background for later use. So in the shot, it's a handheld shot, and I don't really need to 3D track the scene because it's handheld nodal pan basically, and there's no depth moving in the scene, so there's no need for 3D tracking, just like a Mocha 2D planar tracking. So I didn't do that, so I just rendered out one frame composition, say frame as, and I sent that to Blender. So it's a little bit different to set that up in Blender 2.8, so let's do that. So in Blender 2.8, I have a lock camera to view, by the way. In Blender 2.8, the background image panel is no longer in this section. You have to click your camera and go to camera settings, and background images are here, and I've already set it up for you, which it makes sense. It declunks a lot of things, but it's a few more clicks to get there, but it's now here. You just have to enable it and add an image. Pretty simple. Now let's change my focal length here to 58 millimeters because whoa, because I know that's the lens I used. And I'm going to change the camera preset, and now the presets are selected here, which is a new thing that you probably should know. And I was using a, what the heck? Oh, come on. Okay, so you have to use your keypad to get up there. I was using a Micro Four Thirds camera, but it had a speed booster on it, which makes it pretty much APS-C. So I'm going to select that. And now we have basically the correct camera settings. Now I'm just going to line it up with lock camera to view. Roughly, I'm not going to get it perfect, but I'm going to get it pretty rough. There we go. And I'm also going to put them a little bit further than what you saw in the opener, just because I want to show you more ground plane type stuff. Okay, so that seems to be fine. You probably should take a little bit more time on the ground, but that looks about fine to me. I'm going to turn off lock camera to view, so I can't mess with that anymore. And I'm going to add a plane, which will be our ground plane. So let's add that. We're going to scale it on the x-axis like so, then scale it on the y-axis like so. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to try to fit it into this alleyway a little bit better. There we go. So that's pretty cool. One thing that's new with Blender 2.8 is collections, which change around a lot of things, and that means your render layers are in different sections, and it's kind of harder to do things, and it's not as smooth as it used to be, but again, this could change through bigger iterations. So hit M to move it to a new collection. So I'm going to name this collection Ground, not Ground, Ground, and hit OK. So now we have a new collection here with the plane, and then we have our mule robot here on its own collection, and that will be important a little later. So now if we go into render mode here, we can see we have our little shadow on the ground. Now, the one thing you might be thinking, oh, just throw a shadow catcher on it and you're done. Yeah, but it's not very controllable later in post, so I don't do this. So I'm actually just going to add a nice little material on it, not a principal BFD. Actually, I'm going to make it a principal BSD because, or a BSDF. I have a dyslexia, so that's kind of hard for me to say. But the ground is a little bit wet, so there's a little bit of reflection on there. So I might actually even, try to recreate that a little bit. And you see if I up the roughness, it's going to go away. But if I, there we go. What if we add a little bit of roughness there and we get a little bit of a reflection? Just a tiny bit. We don't need a lot, but just enough. And I'm going to make the base color. This is not really scientific at all, but let me turn off the ground plane real quick. This isn't scientific at all. I'm going to go into my camera settings for a second and make sure that's at full. This is not scientific at all, but what I like to do is I like to take the plane and then color it about roughly what the color is. So when the global illumination from the ground will, hit the ground. You can also like projection map it on, but this is a little bit quicker. So I do it like that. And you may need to make it a little bit darker depending on your shot. But yeah, so that's what I like to do. Another thing, what I like to do is probably add some more roughness. So a few things we want to do is we want to separate out this guy and the plane and make sure that they're affecting each other in those planes in these different render layers. So it's a little bit different with the new collections, but it still has the same functionality. We have the ground pass and the mule robot pass, and those are the two passes we're going to need. So up here where it's render layer, which is technically should be called a view layer, this is where we have it. So this first one, I'm going to call it mule robot, knowing that this will be the mule robot pass. And then we're going to add a new view layer, and this view layer will be called ground, just like so. So now we have a mule robot and a ground. Easy peasy. So let's go to the mule robot and take the collection that we moved to take the ground where we moved to the collection, and go to view layer and click set indirect only. Not set exclude, set indirect only. Basically what this does is it won't render in this pass, but it will affect the lighting of this guy. So that helps out a little bit. And then go to the ground pass and do the same with the mule robot. Go to view layer, set indirect only. And as you can see, it's affecting the ground. Now let me show you if we, set exclude, then it doesn't affect the shadows at all. So just make sure to keep that in mind. All right. So now we're almost ready to render. One thing that you do want to keep in mind with these render settings is with this style of rendering that denoise won't work on passes as of right now. Denoising does not work on shadow passes or reflection passes. It only denoises the combined pass, which sucks, but that's what you have to live with. Let's go into the Mule robot and let's render just an image and just test what it looks like, how noisy it looks. That doesn't look too noisy. Another thing what we're going to do is click your camera and we're going to border render, basically only rendering out a section that the sections that we need. So this, part right here, and that's all we need. And that's going to speed up renders a whole bunch. So just make sure to know that you can do this, and that's going to speed up a render. We can also do a few things like lower the transmission passes and the transparency passes because we don't really have that. And the passes, I'm going to just lower these down to 1 and then this down to 1. And then that should be fine. And that's going to speed up a render a little bit. Blender Guru did a great tutorial on how to speed up cycles render. And I usually watch that every time before I start rendering. So that's good. Okay, so another thing we're going to do is if we're rendering an animation, make sure you go to samplings and you're not using denoiser. If you're not using denoiser, click this random seed button because that means every frame will have a new noise seed, which will make it look more like film and it doesn't stick there and it looks a little bit more realistic and not robotic. So keep that in mind as well. So let's hit render. And as you can see, it's rendering out the 2 different render passes, including the ground plane. So let's switch to the compositing tab. And here we have our, compositing little area here. And let's switch this to compositing and use nodes. It should be around here somewhere. There they are. Hey. So let's go in here, hit Shift D, and drag this over here and make sure that's the ground plane. So now we have our 2 little sections. Now, you should be able to see it down here. It's not doing that, so let's just add a backdrop and then hit Shift A and look for the viewer node. And then put that right there, and then boom. You should be able to view it. Yeah, there we go. And we can see our little thing. The one thing I didn't do is actually add render passes. So for the robot itself, I don't really want any different passes. All I want is different passes for the ground to integrate that. So let's go to the ground pass. I want indirect diffuse and indirect glossy, and a shadow and an ambient occlusion pass. Those are the 4 I want. And I'll see if they work here in a bit. So let's save this out and render again. Okay, so let's be looking at a few things. So let's look at our shadow pass here. And we can see we have our shadow pass. And then we have our ambient occlusion pass, which is pretty simple. Then we have our diffused indirect pass, which is not really needed just because this isn't colorful, so it's not going to be spilling that much indirect lighting. But if you want this, if like a colorful, like a red or a green or a really blue thing is like spilling onto the ground, you'd probably want this. And you'd probably want to up your samples a little bit and your clamping just a little bit. And then we have diffuse reflections, which aren't really showing up. We don't really need those for this scene. All we really need is the shadow and the ambient occlusion. Those are the two things we need. And if you saw my previous tutorial, you would know that these passes don't work really well in the compositor, so you have to do a few things in Blender before you can actually use the shadow pass or the ambient occlusion pass, which is basically just adding a difference node or a difference key. Make the shadow into image 2 and the alpha into image 1, I believe. And then you can see what we're doing here. We're going to up the tolerance a little bit and then the fall off like so. And then we have that. Then what you want to do is add a alpha over node after that. Boom. Put that here in the matte as the factor. And then make that black like so. Then hit Shift A again and then invert that like so. Then you have a working shadow pass that actually works. Then you can just, sorry, I'm gonna disconnect this from the compositor real quick. Then you got to take this or hit B, box select this, hit Shift D, duplicate it down, and then do the same thing for the alpha. So the alpha is in image 2, or the ambient occlusion is in image 2, and the alpha is in image 1. Then if I switch this to the viewer, you can see what I did there. So there's the ambient occlusion that works. So now that we have this, let's set this up to be rendered, shall we? Okay. So we have our passes that we want. We have our beauty pass of the combined and the ambient occlusion and the shadow pass. You can add more passes if you need it, but this shot in particular doesn't need it, but I'm just showing you the stuff that I need, so I don't have to I don't need it to be extra. Okay, so I'm going to search for a output, a file output, and here it is. And we're going to go in here, go to properties, and we have our first output that we're going to rename to be called Beauty Pass, B-A-U-D Pass. Add input, and then this input is going to be called AO Pass. Oh, let's make this Shadow Pass. Shadow Pass. Then add another input and name this AO Pass, just like so. So we have the Beauty Pass, the Shadow Pass, and the AO Pass. So take the image, your Beauty Pass here, send that to the Beauty. Your Shadow Pass, send that to the Shadow Pass, and your Ambient Occlusion Pass, send that to the Ambient Occlusion Pass. And then send that to wherever you need it. Let's just say here, and let's name this fun underscore. I do fun underscore because when you're rendering out an animation, you want that underscore there, is because there's going to be numbers right after that, just to keep things a little bit more clean. Then the file format that I'm going to use is OpenEXR multi-layer. Basically what this does is it takes all of these file outputs and it puts it into one file instead of rendering out multiple files. It keeps everything clean and concise, and it's very nice. While doing that, it actually changed up all the names, so I'm just gonna rename. So whenever you hit render animation of your animated sequence, it will then render out each pass into its own little thing in the EXR file, into this multi-layer EXR file. So then let's, I'm just gonna make this like a 2-frame thing, and then I'm gonna render out the animation. All right, so I'm back in After Effects, and let's go and import in the images I got. So I don't know where I put that. Oh, it's in images, aptly named, and I only rendered those 2 frames. And then, of course, I'm just gonna select that, open EXR, and just a nice little sequence there. And I'm just gonna drag and drop that in. It's only 2 frames. Okay. Now, as you can see, this, I'm gonna do another thing real quick. I'm just gonna import in the picture that I used to go under it to show you a little bit. So as you can see, there's nothing here because After Effects can't read it. So you need to use Extractor. Ooh, hey, Microsoft OneDrive. You need to use Extractor. Not extract, Extractor. And then click in this little dial. And then look at all of these passes. These are the passes that we made in Blender, and they're right here. And if I click Beauty Pass and hit OK, there it is. There's our little guy in the same place that we put him. Now, he looks a little dark, but that's just because an EXR file saves all of the light data, and so you're not losing any detail. Like, you can bring that up and you're not losing any detail whatsoever. So, and it makes you actually need to get levels on there and adjust the colors and whatnot. And as you can see, he's looking a little bit floaty. So let's put on our shadow. So it's what I like to do is I just duplicate the lower level, and then I'm going to delete the levels. I'm going to change this to our ambient occlusion pass. So let's switch that to the AO pass, our ambient occlusion. There we go. And for some reason, he's he was floating over the ground plane a little bit. Well, okay, not that big a deal. So let's just throw a multiply on that. There we go. Hit T for opacity. Bring that down just a tiny bit, and then I'm even gonna add like a little fast box blur to remove some of that grain from the sequences. Maybe just 1, and then maybe up that up a little bit more. There we go. So he's floating. I mean, I could have fixed that. I should have fixed that. I guess I just didn't notice it. So then we're going to add our shadow pass. And honestly, the ambient occlusion pass should be fine for this scene because it's an overcast shot. But let's add our shadow pass anyway, just for shits and gigs. And let's multiply that. And the good thing about doing it this way is that we can lower the opacity. We can do that, and we can also change the color of the shadow pass. So take the, throw a tint on there and then make it a little blue or whatnot, because maybe the shadows aren't always completely black because of global illumination and indirect lighting. So there we go. You can easily throw in your stuff, and this is why you do these separate passes, so you can manipulate it later and make it fit in your scene a little bit better. And for the scene that you saw in the shot, obviously I animated it and I did a little bit more. I color graded it and whatnot. I animated it and I added it to the scene, and I have like a different shadow pass there, and I added some glow to his eyes and whatnot. And basically I just tracked this in Mocha, and then I parented the robot to the Mocha tracking just because it doesn't need a 3D tracking. So a 2D tracking was a good idea. So I hope you learned anything from this. Blender 2.8 offers a lot of good things for visual effects artists, and it's really coming along as a software, and I can't wait to see what comes in the next generations and next iterations, because Blender is becoming a powerhouse for visual effects, and I'll be here waiting for it and using it, and as you can see, you can make pretty realistic looking stuff from Blender. So all right, thanks guys for watching, and peace out, Home Scout.